I, male 31, and my wife, female 30, live in Detroit and have a great marriage. About 11 years ago, I was visiting my wife at her parents' house, and her best friend got in my face and asked me why I didn't put a ring on my wife's finger yet, while her best friend, we'll just go and call her Mandy, was grilling me. My wife wasn't stopping her, so I got the point pretty quick since I cared about her so much. I was happy they felt that way after that. I started to make moves to one day marry her. 2 years after that, we got married, and we now have two beautiful daughters. Getting married was one of my happiest days, and I had always planned one day to be a good husband and father. My wife wanted a pretty big wedding, and a lot of people attended. We even got some of our relatives from Puerto Rico to attend me, and my wife weren't rich, but we were good providers, and our kids were always good. My wife was always a great person. She's smart and fun, and she has a great sense of humor, which you don't expect from gorgeous women like her. She was a good mom, and our daughters, who are 7 and 4 years old, love and respect her. Our oldest even acts like her. This is something I would always tell her, and she was gorgeous. I loved her pretty smile, her brown eyes, and especially her amazing ass. She was the type of girl who struggled a little to put some jeans on, and whether it was in a sexy dress or some tights, it was visible on her slim figure. She always loved how she looked, and it caused my mom to believe she had an ego. She might be right, but I never really minded. I work in a renovation project facility, and my wife owns her own nail salon. This never surprised me because she always was a fashionista, which she disagreed about. My wife was always up on the latest trends and had to have everything new, whether it was the new iPhone, new heels, or brand clothes. She had to have it. This made me roll my eyes, but it was her money, so I couldn't say anything until she became a parent, and it made her have to cut back instead of keeping up with the glamorous girl life. Now she focuses on our daughters more. She's now used to last year's model iPhone and cut back on designer clothes for Disney characters. Our daughters love wearing. The only time she wears her good clothes is on holidays or vacations. Even though that's the case, I had to splurge less as well. It doesn't matter because our kids are more important and my family is my priority. Everything seemed okay, but now I'm seeing problems. After me and my wife ran into her old friend's ex-knee, and our family were at the supermarket buying some groceries. Our oldest reminded me about her Pop-Tarts, and my wife told me to go with her to get her favorite ones. After finally making her decision on a new flavor, we came back out the aisle to see my wife laughing and talking to some guy when my daughter interrupted them with the Pop-Tarts. My wife introduced me to him. She said this guy apparently was the ex-boyfriend of her old friend. Let's just call her Tasha at first. I couldn't remember who Tasha was, but then I remembered she used to work with Tasha at some old job before my wife had started up her own business. This guy, we'll call him Trey, seemed happy to see us and was friendly to us. So I didn't mind at first. Trey and my wife caught up a little bit more, and it was awkward to see her smiling all in his face and seemed a little too happy to see him again. After waiting patiently, I signaled it was time to cook dinner, and Trey laughed, saying it was good to see us on the ride home. My wife told me how surprised she was to see him at the supermarket. She said she was more surprised that Tasha and Trey had broken up. I asked how long it was that she spoke to Tasha, and she said about 4 years. After hearing that, I thought to myself that they definitely lost touch at first. I thought that would be the last that I had heard about Trey. But as time went by, I noticed that Trey and my wife kept in touch. They would talk on the phone and also on her social media. He would mention me every once in a while, so I thought nothing about it because I felt included. They started talking more frequently, and the conversations got longer, even up to after hours. But I started getting suspicious when Super Bowl Sunday came around. On the day of the Super Bowl, my wife was talking to Trey on the phone when I asked her a question. After answering me a little while later, she came to me and said Trey wanted to talk to me. Surprised, I took the phone and asked him what's up. He asked me if was I going to watch the Super Bowl, and I told him I planned to. When he asked me who I was going for and said sarcastically the Lions, laughing, he said he was too and offered to watch the game with me. I told him that would be great, but we were going to have a bunch of kids over, and I doubted he would want to deal with that laughing. He said, "Never mind," and I passed the phone back to my wife. I thought that was the end of it. But a couple of hours later, my wife came back and said Trey wanted to talk to me again. He said if I could get away, there was a Super Bowl party a friend of his was having, and I could go and watch it with them. My wife told me she would call her brother and tell him to pick up his kids earlier, and we could go a little late, and I decided to go after she came and got his kids. Me and my wife got ready to go and got there around the halftime show. While talking to everybody, I understood that the party was being thrown because somebody was a D-hard Cincinnati Bengals fan. The person who threw the party argued about who would win and wanted the Bengals to lose. He definitely got his wish, and the Bengals lost to the Rams, and it stopped the guy from being a loudmouth. After having a good laugh at this guy's expense, we all just enjoyed the get-together. It was at this point that I started to get suspicious because of how my wife was interacting with Trey. I didn't like how she was all in his face, and I felt left out in the conversations. I thought it was because I wasn't being so social enough and put myself in the conversations more. At some point, I asked him about why he and Tasha broke up. Trey said he and Tasha were just casually dating. They weren't really serious back then. My wife laughed and said she was surprised because Tasha really liked him. After a while, said I had to go and get another smoff, and walked onto the porch where the cooler was. After I had mingled with some people on the porch, I went back into the house. Going back in the house, I was looking for my wife and saw them talking in a corner. I was about to walk over to them, but I felt a weird vibe about how they were talking. He was a little too close to her and was acting all predatory with her. I paused and stayed out of sight to see what was going on. He held my wife's hand, and she was giggling all shy. After that, she walked into the kitchen and he followed her while looking at her ass. All I could say was, "What the butt?" Then I moved a little closer to get a good look at the kitchen. Standing by the sink, my wife was talking to a girl, and her back was turned away from Dre while talking to my wife. The girl looked at Trey and could see that he was looking at her. Think, she told my wife, and my wife looked back and smiled at him, turning back to the girl. She continued their conversation, knowing that Trey was looking at her ass. Usually, I love the way my wife dresses, but now I was feeling very paranoid. My wife would talk to the girl, then look back and smile at Trey as he continued to take glances at my wife's ass in her yoga pants. My wife wouldn't budge. She would just look at him like she was saying, "I know you want to do me." Even though they would try to play it off, they would go back to looking at each other. And you would notice if you were paying attention. All I could think was, I hope I'm not seeing what I think that I'm seeing. After the girl said something to my wife, she followed her back into the living room, and she ended up seeing me. She asked me what the guys on the porch were talking about, and I told her nothing much, and that I was ready to go. Just a quick reminder to hit the subscribe button. I really appreciate it. It helps a lot. She said she wanted to stay longer, but I reminded her that her brother was still with our kids waiting on us, so he could leave. After we said goodbye to Trey and everybody, we went back home, especially since we both had to work tomorrow. Riding back, I had to tell her what I saw in the car. I told her it looked like Trey was trying to hit on her, and she acted like I was crazy. She laughed it off and said I was wrong. I left it alone, but I wanted to start paying more attention to them after what I saw. He was definitely looking at her house. The more I paid attention, the more suspicious I noticed she was acting. She always had her phone. She always brought up Trey to me and to her best friend Mandy. Then she started handcuffing her phone, talking all the way too early in the morning. One night I asked her if was she still talking to Trey. She just shot me a look and said she was. After that, she hung up the phone after about 5 minutes. After a while, I got tired of her talking so late and asked her to talk in the daytime with him, and her excuse, well, she talks to Mandy. Then when I told her it was really inappropriate to talk to Trey so late at night, she'd laugh and say I'm acting paranoid. Everything I'd try and say, she would dismiss it and say I'm worried about nothing. All my questions did make her stop bringing up Trey. However, I guess she thought it would stop me from getting all upset. But it didn't. 2 days ago made me believe the worst on my wife's off day. She said she was going over to her friend Mandy's house to do her mom's nails since I knew about this. A couple of days ago, I really wasn't suspicious later on that night. My youngest daughter asked me if we could eat pizza, but I told her that her mom was cooking dinner. She made a big fuss about it, and since I was in the mood for pizza as well, decided to call my wife and tell her she didn't have to cook anything. When I called my wife, it went straight to voicemail. I had to ask myself why the hell was her phone off and that this never happened before I let half an hour pass, and her phone still went to voicemail. After that, I decided to call Mandy. When I called Mandy, she actually picked up. I asked her, was my wife there? And she said she left. I said I thought she was going to do Mandy a favor and do her mother's nails for her. But she said she got a phone call and just left. I asked her who called, and she said she didn't know, but she was mad that my wife told Mandy to tell her mother to come by her nail salon tomorrow. This surprised me because Mandy was like a real sister to her, and to hear that this happened was just up after hanging up with her. I called around and nobody called my wife, so to me, this left only Trey. I got so angry I couldn't believe this was happening at the Super Bowl party. Trey told us where he stayed, but I didn't know the address, only the street. If my wife was there, I knew he was doing her after grabbing my keys. I was just about to walk out the door when I remembered my kids were still in their room playing, grabbing my phone. I called my mom to see if she could babysit for a while, but she didn't pick up the phone. My best friend, let's call him Marcus, was my last option. So I called him up. When he picked up, I asked him what he was doing, and he said his girl was cooking dinner. I told him I was about to ask him for a favor, and he asked me what it was. I told him, never mind, it was too big of a favor, but he asked me again, so I told him I thought my wife was cheating on me after telling Marcus this. He went silent, like it was the last thing he'd think I'd say. He asked me if was I serious, and I told him everything. He said that he couldn't come and watch the kids, but I could bring the kids to him. This pissed me off because he lived on the other side of town. After getting the kids ready to leave, it took about 30 minutes to get there. After getting to Marcus, he asked me did I knew where Trey lived. The street Trey lived on was a long avenue, and he asked me if was I really going to drive all the way down the street to find them, and I said yeah. When I was about to leave, he stopped me and told me to go in his car. He said if I'm wrong and they see my car, my wife could call me a crazy husband, and at least they won't recognize his car right off after handing me the keys. He told me, don't do anything crazy in his car. He asked, did I wanted him to come with me? And I said, no, it's already up. He's involved. He took the kids and I made my way to try to find my wife. Hopefully I wasn't too late, and I could bust her in the ACT, but I hoped I was really wrong about this, but my instincts as a man still bother me. After a long ride, I made it down the street. Trey lives on slowing down. I tried to look for my wife's silver Kia. It was a terrible neighborhood, but at this point, I couldn't care less. All the suspicious my wife was doing led me to this. I was really hoping I couldn't find her car here, but eventually I did. Not only did I see her car, but I saw her and Trey as well. She was wearing a pink sweatsuit, and Trey had on nothing but a white sweater, some shorts, and some flip-flops. She looked like she was getting ready to leave, and I couldn't believe what I saw. I mean, the guy had practically no clothes on, and I didn't like how he was again too close to her driving past. I threw a fit in the car. I kept saying he, her. I know, he, her. I didn't have any other explanation except he was doing my wife. I bet magically her phone works now. Not only did I catch her all hugged up with this guy, now I had to try and beat her home when I got home. I was surprised to see that me and the kids beat her home with time to spare after putting the kids to bed. I decided to wait up for my wife to come in. Almost 40 minutes later, she came in the door and she was acting unhappy to come back, looking over at me. She walked right past me and went into the bedroom, her not saying anything really blew my mind. I walked into our bedroom immediately and asked why her phone was turned off, and she told me that she had never turned it off. She said her phone died and she had to charge it up. I asked her where she was, and she said she already told me she was over at Mandy's house. I told her. Mandy said she left and she brushed it off like she was irritated. She said that didn't mean she wasn't there, and it just blew me away that I was going through this right now. I asked her, did she leave Mandy to be with Trey? And she hesitated for a minute before saying, yeah. I asked, she didn't say anything, and she told me it didn't matter. She said she's tired of me having a problem with Trey, and she just wanted to leave this alone because she was tired. She asked me, did the kids eat? And I told her we went out to eat. Not even asking questions, she went back in the living room to watch TV and be on her phone after that night. She was not the same wife that I knew now. She doesn't talk to me. She always texting on her phone in the dining room, and she always looks at me like she wants to get away from me, but she can't. This is because she's acting like I did something to her when all I do is cater to her and whose battery dies in the middle of the day. I really don't know what to do, and I need to make a decision on my gut feelings. I don't know if she cheated, but her behavior has been a bunch of red flags. I hope I'm overreacting, but the signs are there, especially at the Super Bowl party. They've been talking all day. He's been looking at her ass at a party, and she allowed it. And now she's meeting up at his house secretly. He has to be doing her. I will try an update once I find something solid, but I really need to know if I'm overreacting, update people. Here said it was going to get worse, and it did. Now she looks at me like I'm her prison guard and doesn't really want to talk to me. She only talks to her friends on her phone and doesn't interact with the kids and treats them like they're a chore. She just sits in our little dining room area and texts. I didn't even know what to say to her. What was even worse was, thanks to my schedule, I couldn't really stop her from cheating. My wife knew my everyday routine, and I'm sure Trey did too, between my job taking care of our kids and obligations to my mom. They apparently met up while I was out. I know this because while I was out, I would try to call her, and she never answered. My wife's schedule was more flexible than mine, especially since my wife was her own boss thanks to her nail salon. Whenever I got back home, my wife wouldn't be there, especially if she didn't have to pick up the kids from school. And when she came back, she was vague about where she was. This really messed with my mind and gave me what I think is anxiety. I would be with my mom and I would be thinking of my wife riding some guy's meat. And this was ever since she left TR house that night. If it wasn't for this community, I wouldn't have been a lot worse if I was blindsided by this. I don't know what my mindset would be after I was told to calm down and start monitoring them for truth. I had to man up after doing just that. I was able to get the truth and found out today that yes, Trey was my wife, and my plan worked out perfectly. That weekend after work, I bought a V and put it in her car. At first, I tested it out when I took the kids to eat at McDonald's, and it works pretty well. After that, I put it in my wife's car, since it's possible he banged her in the car. It should pick it up. It should even pick up any talk or incriminating conversations they could be having doing this. I did feel crazy and couldn't believe this was my life. The most important advice I think I got was to act like I wasn't concerned about Trey. It was a lie, but I think I need to start getting used to it, not bringing him up and acting like everything was good. Got her to ease up a little. It was hard, but I just kept my mind on getting the truth when I told Marcus about this even. He thought I was a genius. A few days ago, I snuck out and got the V out of her car and listened to what was on it. I heard a few things, but I definitely heard her talking with Trey in her car. The one thing that stood out was when they were riding somewhere, the music was on, but it could still kind of make out what they were saying. He was definitely flirting with my wife and calling her sexy. My wife was giggling and I couldn't make out what she was saying. But it wasn't stopping him. I heard him tell her to stop somewhere and things got silent for a minute. Then it sounded like a bunch of guys got in the car and they drove off. It got harder to hear them with everybody holding their own conversations. It sounded like she was driving them around to places through all their nonsense. I heard him say he was trying to come over for a second. I couldn't hear the conversation, but I definitely heard my wife say to Trey she has to leave early, so come over. That was pretty much the end of the usefulness coming from the VR in her car. They just tea-talked and laughed, and one guy called Trey thirsty. After that, I tried to figure out who was my wife talking about when she said somebody was leaving early. I thought it may be Mandy, but even though Mandy was like a sister to her, it didn't seem like she told Mandy about Trey. She definitely wasn't talking about her mom. So it had to be the girl who ran the salon with my wife. It didn't make too much sense to me because she was a teenager learning to do nails there. but it was the best thing to go on. Nobody else made sense. I called up my friend Marcus to see if we could swap cars for the day, and he said yeah, after telling him what I heard he was shocked, called her a high-price hoe, and said he hoped I catch her this time already, knowing how I move. She knew to leave after me, and my mom's next-door neighbors helped her with her yard since I couldn't cancel on my mom. I told her I'd only stay for a little while because I was tired from work. My mom blew down on me for leaving early, but then her next-door neighbor said he could handle it around 9. I pulled up to my wife's shop when it was closing. It's located in a strip mall, so it was possible to hide with the other cars there, especially since it was Marcus's car. I drove inside. Trey was definitely there, and I was pissed to know I was right. Nobody was left inside except my wife, and let's call her Sherry. My wife was definitely dressed to impress, and Trey was all over her. I saw Trey behind my wife with his arms wrapped around her while they were talking. After about 20 minutes, they really started to get into it, and Trey was kissing on my wife's neck and grabbing her on her behind after trapping her against the wall. It was clear, it was kissing, and Sherry just watched them. After about 5 minutes, Sherma said something about leaving, and they smiled and waved her off, taking the Trey's hand. They walked off to the back where it looked like they were going down into the basement area. I've been down in the basement area when she first started up the salon, so I knew that was the only thing in the back. She was looking for a bigger place to run her shop so she could have an office space, since the place she's at now wasn't really high-end looking enough for her. If she doesn't know anything, she knows how to market. Something I was so pissed off, I can't lie. I really can't believe this woman would do this to me. I did so much for her, and she would do this to me. Trey was definitely a real snake. He never gave me good vibes about him, and I now see why. After I grabbed my VR, I made my way over to the salon. Sherry had just gotten done grabbing her things, so I waited for her to come out before I made my presence known. When I called out to her, she looked like she saw a ghost in front of her. I told her not to lock the doors and that I knew everything she claimed she didn't know what I was talking about, and I said I watched them the whole time. I called her a fat lying, and we got into a huge argument. She said don't blame her that my wife was another man, and I called her messy, and to get out of my way she said I wasn't going to be able to catch them because the door was locked. I had asked her, why would they lock the door if Sure knew they were all ready, and she said they didn't want anybody coming down. Making my way in, pulled out my phone and called my wife. Apparently, Sherry decided to follow me in while I had made my way to the back. My wife didn't answer my call, so I surprised her by banging on the basement door since it actually was locked. I didn't know what was going on down there, but I knew if she didn't come up, we were over. After banging on the door 3 times telling them to come up, they still didn't come from the basement. Turning back to Sherry, I asked her how long she knew about this. Sherry swore she knew about Trey for about a month, and my wife started cheating with him recently. She said he came in on her break, and after a while they had gone down in the basement. She said the next day they would talk about what happened. I asked her did she knew that was Tasha's ex-boyfriend, and she said my wife told her. I told Sherry we had kids, and she said she didn't have anything to do with that. I said that's fine, and that I'll be using what she said in court. When Sherry asked me what I was talking about, I showed her the VAR and told her she could go home now. Getting back in the car, I drove back to Marcus, who was a big help with not just the car, but watching the kids too. I told him what I saw, and he and his girlfriend consoled me after that. While I and Marcus were talking, Mandy called my phone. I decided to pick up, and she said my wife told her everything, and that my wife wanted to talk to me tomorrow. I told her to put her on the phone now, but Mandy said she wouldn't let me talk to her now, and she knew I was going to blow up on her. I told her I wanted to speak to my wife, but Mandy wouldn't put her on. Mandy said if I came over, she'd call the police and wait until tomorrow. She said she was going to make my wife call me, and they both wanted me to calm down. I said, yeah, whatever, and just hung up. After coming back home with the kids, I got super emotional. Not only that my anxiety started kicking in again, I still can't believe this is happening to me even after I did everything right. With this woman, somehow, I did it wrong. I thought after being married for this long, I was sure I didn't have to worry about this happening. The worst is that this wasn't a one-time thing. He was her consistently. Now my whole world is going to have to change. For whatever reason, I can't wait to see what she has to say tomorrow. I will update you when I hear what she has to say. The ball is in her court, and if I don't like the way I hear, I'm getting us a divorce. My mind is racing, and I think it may have been a bad idea to leave Marcus's house. I feel alone, but I had to post here since everybody wanted to know exactly what my wife was doing. Final update. The next day came, and my wife never called me. That was fine with me because I was in the middle of calling everybody to let them know about her cheating, and I called a lawyer after talking to a recommended lawyer online. I was supposed to call him back because he was leaving the office at the time, and he had questions for me later after that. I took my kids over to my mom's house because she demanded they stay with her for the weekend. My mom blamed this on me because I married her, and she said she didn't trust me with the kids right now. My aunt came in from the kitchen and asked why my mom was raising her voice. My mom explained it to my aunt, and she looked super shocked. Throwing her hands up, she sat on my mom's couch to unmute the TV. After mom muted it to start blowing down on me, even though my mom came down on me hard. I was happy she was taking the kids. I had a lot going on in my head. And being by myself helped me get it out since I was still angry when we arrived. My friend Marcus called me too and asked if I had spoken to my wife. I told him no, and that she was probably sucking some dick somewhere. And he said she may not even call, which was fine with me. I was just preparing to move on Saturday. I was trying to clean my house, and I heard my wife's keys in the door. I really must have been not paying attention to anything because I have heard her car pull up. My wife and her friend Mandy walked in, and it caught me by surprise. She definitely didn't look like her normal self because she was wearing a gray Nike sweatsuit, no makeup, and her hair wasn't combed and held together by a rubber band. The shame on her face showed remorse, probably for the fact that she had got caught. I wasn't used to seeing her like this because she was usually a breathtaking woman. Maybe this was only a privilege for Try. Now, she clearly liked the way he was checking her out at his Super Bowl party, especially when he was looking at her ass. My wife had what you would call a booty, and just like other girls wore yoga pants and caught Trey trying to sneak looks at it. I think you can say that's what started all of this, and it got them caught after me being suspicious after walking into our house. Mandy asked me to just let my wife speak, and I said, fine. After that, Mandy said something to my wife and went out on the porch. I told my wife I was surprised she came and even bothered to talk to me. She said she felt like she needed to after I saw her and Trey at her salon. She said, after that, she was scared to come back home. She asked where the kid were, and I told her they were with my mom. She looked down as if that wasn't what she wanted to hear and told me she was mad about me telling her co-owner of her nail salon, Sherry, to tell me everything about Trey. I told her that I didn't have to. I told her after Sherry got caught, she immediately ratted her out to save her own skin. My wife said they got into an argument, and Sherry hasn't come back to work, and I told her that she got caught cheating, and I don't care about Sherry having a big mouth. My wife threw up her hands and said I was right, and said she didn't want to fight. She said she was sorry, and she didn't want me to find out about her cheating with Trey. Her saying sorry wasn't going to make it okay, and that she betrayed me. I asked her how could she just parade this guy around me, acting like he's just a friend, and then throw our relationship in the garbage, she said. She was sorry, and she let her fantasies with Trey get out of hand. She said when her friend Tasha from her old job was dating him, she always told my wife how great he was. She would always say how handsome he was, and she would show my wife all the sexting Tasha and Trey did while they were at work the next day. Tasha and my wife would talk about it, and my wife liked it, she said. When Trey came to their job to pick her up, she saw Trey and thought he was handsome after talking about Trey with Tasha. She knew she liked him. I asked her, did he said something to her at the time? And she said he complimented her a few times, and that was it. I told her I knew something was off, because when we ran into Trey at the supermarket, I don't remember her giving him her phone number. She said he asked for it, and he began texting her and started flirting with her again. Then it turned to sexting. She said after that she started hanging out with him and some of his friends. I asked her, was that the day when she was supposed to be doing Mandy's mom's nails down Trey's house, and I named off his street to let her know I knew where he lived. Exactly. She asked how I knew this, and I told her I went looking for her and saw her with him outside that night. Asked her again, and she said yes. I asked, did she him? And all she could say was that she was sorry. She said, when he called her, he said everybody was there hanging out, and he convinced my wife to ghost Mandy to hang with them, she said. When she got there, she waited for more people to show up, and Trey had admitted he just wanted her to be alone with him. I asked her why she didn't leave, and she said she knew what he wanted. She said he got all touchy with her and started kissing her after that. I called her a stupid, and she up our marriage, and she said she was sorry. I told I could never trust her again, and she said she wasn't asking me to. I asked what she meant by that. She said she wanted to pursue a relationship with Trey. I told her she was crazy, and she said she really wanted to. She said always fantasized about Trey, and she didn't think it mattered until we ran into him that day. She said when he told her that he and Tasha weren't serious, it actually made her happy, especially after he started flirting with her again. She said she secretly hoped something would happen, and it did when she went to his house. Night. She said when he was her, she wanted to feel bad, but she didn't after he would call her to hang out. She said it would happen spontaneously. Then it was planned. She said she should have talked to me about it instead. Going behind my back with Trey, she said that I didn't deserve it, and this was the better way to go about it. I told her she was crazy and asked if she really wanted to leave her family for this guy. She said it was a feeling she always had about him and she wished she pursued it. Before being married to me, she told me Trey wanted a relationship with her, especially since she liked Trey more than she liked me. I asked her was she his friends too, and she called me crazy. I told her I had to ask because I knew she's been riding around with them. She said that Trey would sometimes call her and tell her to pick his friends up and give them a ride somewhere. I asked, was she now some kind of Uber, and she just rolled her eyes. She said it just happened, and I just said whatever my wife said she wanted out of our marriage because she didn't want to be married to me while think about somebody else. I reminded her she couldn't date Trey at the time because he was already dating Tasha, and we were still together at the time. I asked her what Tasha would think about her wanting to be with Trey. She said they were just casually dating at the time, and she wouldn't care now. I told her that's true, but Tasha would think less of her as a friend, and she would be right. She said she didn't want to argue. She wanted to end this on good terms. After that, she left with Mandy, who kept peeking her head in, and they drove back to God knows where. As much as I didn't want to agree with my wife, she was right. I would hate being married to her and knowing she'd rather be with another guy. She was very delusional, but I'd rather let her find out for herself. After that, living in the house by myself was even harder. I was definitely pissed off at this embarrassment. Is this what relationships are like now? Is it that easy? Throw your marriage away like this? I honestly thought being married for 99 years would mean we didn't have to worry about these things. When Monday came, I called off work to meet with a lawyer and filed for divorce. Somebody said I could get alimony from my wife's nail salon, and he said if the kids want to live with me, that's doable. My mom has been a big help with the kids, but I found out Mom spoiled my kids while they were with her. Also told them that my wife was leaving the family to go live somewhere else. When my oldest asked me, all I could do was shake my head. Thanks to my mom, I have had to tell them, and they didn't take it well. Even though my mom that it fell in my favor. After picking up my kids, we rolled past Trey's house, and I showed my kids that's where their mom wants to live. I asked my kids, did they want to live there with her? They both rickety house with a bunch of guys standing on the porch and said no. I asked, were they sure? And my oldest said not for $1 million. I called my wife on my lunch break today and told her that I already filed for the divorce. She said okay. She said she wanted to come over and talk to the kids, and I told her my mom was picking them up from school today because I had things to do. My wife said she really wanted to talk to them, and I said when I get home, she can come over, and I'll ask my mom to bring them back after hanging out with her. She asked to just pick up the kids, and I told her if she wants to see the kids so bad, go over to my mom's house and pick them up. But it won't be the smartest thing she did. She got upset and said, I always hide behind my mom, and I told her if she wants to see the kids, go over to my mom's house. That is, if she's bold, giving a frustrated sigh, she hung up, clearly knowing how petty my mom can be. Since then, I haven't heard from my wife. I sent her one last text saying, all we need to talk about from here is about the divorce and sometimes our kids right now. I'm only thinking about my daughter's life. Just because my wife gave up on them, that doesn't mean they're alone. I know for a fact Trey wouldn't plan on giving up his play a life, I hope, while she's busy taking a facial. That she would think about that. It's not my problem anymore, and like I said, I'll let her worry about what might happen. I really want to thank everybody here for the amazing support. I was definitely scared to go down the road, and it made me braver. I've heard stories about them catching their so in lies like I did, even worse. Some catching them in the ACT, which would have killed me. My wife was very FL, and it showed through her being extremely selfish. How could she break all her standards for him and force me to abide by them? It's a question I've been hearing from good men lately, and it seems unfair. This is my last update, and I want to thank you guys one more time.